coming up is Caleb Maupin. In fact, not just coming up, he's actually here. Let's bring him on. We are joined. How you doing, my man? Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. How you doing, Caleb? You doing all right this morning?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing good. Better that you are with me. I have been following some of the wild events that have been taking place, and I want to get yours on a few of them. One of them has to do with this issue of quote unquote free speech. Donald Trump is arguing free speech is back. I am the avatar of free speech, while simultaneously cracking down on college campuses, even to the point of saying we're kicking people out of the country if they criticize Israel and Gaza. Okay, this is outrageous. And, you know, when Vance was over in Europe, basically browbeating Europeans, and by the way, accurately browbeating Europeans. You guys are canceling elections. You're putting people in prison. They locked up Richard Medhurst in Vienna, Austria, most likely on behalf of the Brits for his reporting on the issue of Gaza and Israel. So Vance is right. And I remember when Vance was giving that speech, I was like, he's right, but let's see if it applies to the sacred ponies back in the U.S., such as the issue of Israel and Gaza. And lo and behold, it does not. Give me your take on this. You can't have this idea that you're an avatar of free speech, but then when it hits a topic that you don't particularly like, you try to redefine it as anti-Semitism to criticize Israel for genocide. It's just outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is clearly grandstanding for his pro-Israel supporters.
Yes.
And the thrust of what he is saying is absolutely wrong. I mean, you should be able to criticize Israel all you want. You should be able to protest for any political cause, and Israel's crimes are reprehensible and the Palestinians are right. And what I do have questions about, right, is I've noticed that some of the statements Trump makes are oddly worded, right? Like one of them is he will cut off the funding, he said, for any university that allows illegal protests. Well, if a protest is illegal, by definition, it's not allowed. So what does that mean? Like no campus allows illegal protests. So I'm just like, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? And I know there's one student who's a Chinese national who was was arrested and deported for leading protests. And I oppose that. Obviously, I think students that are studying here have the right to engage in political dissent, et cetera.
That's right.
And that shouldn't happen. But I guess I wonder how much of this is just Trump beating his chest to show off to his base. I mean, if indeed they are seriously going to every campus and trying to arrest and deport, every student who's engaged in a Palestine protest, that's obviously wrong. And I oppose that. I'm not sure that's actually happening. I mean, this seems like Trump.
Pam Bondi apparently came out and is opening right here. Pam Bondi opened an investigation into alleged quote unquote anti-Semitism at the University of California. So they are trying to put the screws to these various schools using whatever mechanism they have at their disposal at the White House.
I mean, it looks to me like they're putting on a show, is what it looks to me. It looks like they're pandering very hard to pro-Israel people who don't like these protests, and I oppose that. I mean, I think that the protesters are correct, that we shouldn't be spending money on Israel. We shouldn't be funding Israel's crimes. And so to the extent that Donald Trump is pandering to them and making statements that indicate somehow it's wrong for college students to use their free speech to criticize Israel, he's wrong in doing so. I just... I am careful with, I get the impression when I look at social media coming from the left that you're getting the impression that he's like engaging in like a fascist crackdown and roundup. And I'm not seeing that.
No.
So
I agree with you that some of the stuff is, I got elected on Israel first. I'm going to do any and everything in my power, including redefine free speech as anti-Semitism. And I'm going to do anything in my power as administration to make life miserable for people who are protesting Israel. That's the sense of it that I get. I'm saying it's outrageous that the president is getting involved in this nonsense at all. But to be fair, so is Joe Biden. That's the problem the Democrats have, right? If you remember, I remember Joe Biden made the speech for Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter, the protesters, now keep in mind, like 95% were peaceful protests. However, there were excesses, to put it mildly, in burning down police stations, setting up these, areas where they didn't want cops in and those type of things. And I remember Joe Biden went out and made a speech effectively saying, defending all of it and just kind of yada excesses. Meaning, in that context, he was perfectly okay with defending protests, despite the fact that those protests were taking place all across the U.S. The protests against against Israel for what they were doing in Gaza, basically their genocide, those were peaceful protests. They all throughout, they were peaceful. And Joe Biden comes out and picks up one or two issues and acts as if that is all of the protests. Like, these protests are violent. They're going after Jewish students. None of these things were in fact true. Meaning, he was shaping his speech based upon his own political priorities, regardless of the realities on the ground associated with what he was talking about. Trump is doing something very similar. And so it's a bit rich for Democrats to complain about what Trump is doing on this front when Joe Biden was doing something very similar. So I feel you. I get it. It's still problematic. I don't want him kicking people out of the country.
I don't either.
Protesting a genocide.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't agree with what he's saying, but I think it's interesting because at the same time, now it's revealed he's actually negotiating directly with Hamas, which Biden refused to do. So, I mean, it looks to me like he's on the defensive because he's actually doing that. So he has to, he made some pretty crazy tweets yesterday. And, he's making these statements about the protesters and stuff. And it's like, a lot of his supporters are pro-Israel. And he's actually negotiating directly with Hamas, which Biden refused to do, which U.S. government has generally refused to do, right? Considers them to be terrorists, et cetera. So it looks like there might be a slight move in a good direction with Gaza coming from the Trump administration. So they really have to, go over the top to show that they're with Israel. And, they're trying to cover themselves almost.
I agree with Garland on this. What Garland points out, Garland's thing is like, I'm going to wait and see what Trump does, not what he says, because he says such crazy things. But, like you pointed out, he could be saying those crazy things because, look, I am of mind, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, that all things being equal, he wants to maintain the peace deal in Israel. He wants to maintain that deal between Israel and Gaza, despite the fact that Netanyahu does not. Mm-hmm. And if that's your political positioning, then you might come out and make crazy statements. Oh, we're going to destroy everybody in Gaza if they don't do so and so and so and so. But then, as you pointed out, behind the scenes, despite the fact that he's saying that, they're admitting, yes, we are in direct talks with Hamas. Now, who the hell knows what those talks are? But this is press secretary talking about it.
Why is the U.S. now negotiating directly and for the first time ever with Hamas?
Well, when it comes to the negotiations that you're referring to, first of all, the special envoy who's engaged in those negotiations does have the authority to talk to anyone. Israel was consulted on this matter. And look, dialogue and talking to people around the world to do what's in the best interest of the American people is something that the president has proven is what he believes is good faith effort to do what's right for the American people.
Is it just about the hostages? Or are they also talking about the president's plan to take over Gaza?
These are ongoing talks and discussions. I am not going to detail them here. There are American lives at stake. I would defer you to the Department of State for further details, but I'm not going to get into those talks here.
That is fascinating. As she pointed out, for the first time ever, they're in talks with Hamas. And I love her defense of this. It is not a negative to talk to people who we disagree with. Right. Oh, I love that. Like, that is so new. Like, that is not, and yeah, I'm getting excited about that because for my take, if we have a disagreement, the only way we can settle that disagreement is through talks. And Hamas has said, look, we will step back if it means us moving forward on a deal. Now, the Arab League apparently came out with a, $65 billion deal. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It was something like that, where they were talking about rebuilding Gaza and everything else. I was speaking to Lath about it. Lath was saying there's no chance that is going to go through because that is not what Israel wants. What's your take on that? Like, give me your take on this. Do you think I'm right that behind the scenes, Trump probably does want to maintain the deal, considering he's taken this point of view of, I'm a peace candidate, I want to end wars, I don't want to start wars, et cetera, et cetera. How do you view this? How do you process this politically?
I think Donald Trump is constantly thinking about Donald Trump and how Donald Trump will be remembered, how Donald Trump will go in history, how people will look back on Donald Trump. And I think for his own selfish reasons, he wants to be remembered as a peacemaker. He wants to be remembered as somebody who improved things in the world. And that is probably motivating him to lean toward doing things that are slightly better. Now, that said, he's still got a huge amount of very bigoted pro-Israel people that he's trying to please. I mean, we saw that speech. Isn't it interesting that in his State of the Union address, he didn't say Israel once? Not once. There was not a single mention of that in his speech. Nothing. Now that I found to be like, what was going on?
Why? Why don't you think he brought up Israel in that speech?
Well, he didn't think he needed to. I mean, he thought he could just not. I mean, I expected that at any point in that speech there would be a pro-Israel tirade, but there wasn't. And I suspect that polling probably shows that average Trump supporters don't want to hear that. I mean, a lot of the speech was stuff that people that like Trump want to hear, the military stuff and supporting the military, and the woman who had she had a basketball thrown at her head by a transgender person. And it was all stuff that your average Trump supporter wants to hear. And I just think average Trump supporter doesn't really care if you get up and say, all right, Israel, woohoo. He didn't do that. He just didn't feel a need to do that at all. There was a lot of stuff in the speech I didn't particularly care for, but there was also what I was expecting was the pro-Israel tirade. And I didn't hear that. And that again, and then we find out the next day, it's leaked, it's revealed that there is talks going on with Hamas, and then Trump's kind of embarrassed about that, and so he makes some crazy tweets, and there's more stuff about the protesters and all of that. I asked some questions here. Again, you can't judge Trump by what he says, but by what he does, and that applies to every politician, but especially Donald Trump, because he says one thing one day and one thing another. I mean, my biggest concern with Trump is the economic consequences of the Doge. Because if you get rid of so many good paying government jobs, DC is already suffering economically from the loss of federal employees. And, there is going to be a fallout. And I worry that, the response that Donald Trump got to his State of the Union, where, they were sitting there silently, cold shouldering him, and was it Al Green was waving his cane around. And if there is a big economic fallout, the Democrats could ride that energy to oust him from office, which is what they want to do. I mean, they very clearly want to do. So I worry about that. He needs to make sure that the economic consequences of so many dramatic cuts in government spending, don't come back to haunt him. That is my concern there. I mean, that you can't cut your way into economic growth. And I've said that over and over and over again. You can't cut your way into economic growth. And
but this is Republican orthodoxy, though. In general, they want to cut Medicare, cut Social Security, cut Social Security. The reporting came out, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, that he is trying to eliminate the Department of Education, and has wrote up an executive order effectively saying find any and every method that you can do that is legal to effectively destroy the Department of Education.
Well, the Department of Education sucks. I don't disagree with them on that, but there's also a lot of thousands of employees right there who are making, six-figure salaries, a lot of them, and they'll all be unemployed and not spending money. And that'll be money taken out of the U.S. economy. And libertarian economics is alchemy. It's wizardry. It's fake. Right. Libertarians say things all the time that anyone with that basic knowledge of economics will shake their heads. Like they claim there would not be any monopolies if it weren't for the government. That's crazy. That's absurd. Monopolies naturally rise in the market. We have antitrust laws, et cetera, to break them apart. But this academic wizardry says, no, it's government that creates monopolies. The market is just magic and it just magically prevents monopolies. That's not true. I mean, they'll say all kinds of things like that, and they believe it. And we've been spoon-fed this stuff, especially since the Cold War, because the enemy was communism. So, capitalism was revolutionary. Capitalism was utopia. Well, no, it's not. No one would have ever talked about communism or fascism, for that matter, if there weren't really, really big problems with the capitalist free market system, right? And you go back to the 1930s when the Great Depression hit. Everybody knew that the free market liberal system had failed over and over and over again. You'd had great crises. You had all kinds of famines and, man-made famines in India, and people all over Africa killed, and Irish man-made land seizures and potato famines that drove people here. I mean, when they give you this body count for, communism's killed this many million people, it's like capitalism, the free trade, liberal, open international system, the British Empire, that system has killed far, far more people than any system in history, by leaps and bounds. I mean, that system, began, you talk about, capitalism came into being with what's called the primitive accumulation, which is the feudal commons that were, public property technically, but run by a lord who had control over them, and all the peasants lived there. They turned it into private property, and they started then executing people for being homeless. And as they were, creating, the free market in Britain, thousands and thousands of people were hung for being vagabonds, for being homeless. That was the crime. And then from there, what did they do? They started seizing Africa. They started seizing the United States and the Americas from the Native Americans. You had the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, the way the wealth of the world was acquired just to create the capitalist system was genocide on a massive scale. And that's why it's so ridiculous. You get this argument, socialism is theft. I've heard this before. Socialism is theft. Well, you're stealing. These people just work hard. The people who have the wealth of this world did not acquire it. The wealth of this world and the wealth to create the capitalist system was not acquired through hard work and innovation. It was acquired through massive theft, and that was just the beginning. And then how many wars have been waged to divide up the world among the colonizers? How many people have been worked to death in sweatshops? And I mean, you can go down the line. I mean, this is the most murderous system that has ever existed. So, it gets frustrating because we just don't acknowledge that, right? It's like, well, if all these people that have died because of capitalism, that just happened, right? But communism, whenever they've been in power, they killed people. And so it's like an absurd thing. I mean, you think about China had their century of humiliation when, they said to the British Empire, look, we're going to protect our own industries and our own economy. So the British waged 2 opium wars against them and forced them to accept the British domination of their economy, including the importing of opium, narcotics to get people addicted. And the Chinese government estimates that roughly 100 million people died as a result of the economic devastation that China was subjected to after the Opium Wars. Now, is that, are we going to put that in a body count? So, yeah, I mean, it's just, and we have this capitalism is utopia, capitalism is freedom, capitalism just means people working hard. We've never had real capitalism. If only we got the government out of the way. This is the libertarian thought. This is libertarian right-wing stuff. And it's honestly what you'll learn if you go to college and take basic economics. You'll learn this stuff, right? Now, if you get a little further up, most academic economists reject this stuff. Most academic economists are Keynesians, meaning that they believe it is necessary for the state to spend money in order to stabilize the economy. However, basic economics in the United States is taught with these kind of radical free market assumptions. And so people think that they have this understanding of economics when you really don't. And yeah, I just have to say that. And that's my biggest fear for Trump, is because I see they are trying to implement, Ludwig von Mises, Austrian school, Chicago school economics. And I know economics. I've spent a lot of my life studying economics, and I'm telling you, that's not going to have good results.
Okay, let's dig into that. He is enacting a tariff war across the world. China, Mexico, Canada, Europe is going to be in the crosshairs at some point, where he apparently deploys a huge amount of tariffs on them also. What is he trying to accomplish? And do you think he's going to be able to do it? And because from my point of view, this is going to be chaos. In fact, there was reporting that came out talking about people are freaked out economically for what is effectively taking place. Donald Trump is going to raise prices all throughout the United States. Canada has come out effectively saying, we are not catering to this, and that they have did reciprocal tariffs with the idea that we are not backing down from this. Mexico came out. And what's wild about this too, if you remember in Trump's last administration, he did, the Mexico, US, Canada trade deal this reorganization of NAFTA. And he comes out and said, this is a big, beautiful deal. Everything is great. And now he comes back in office and it's like, I want to now renegotiate a deal that I negotiated a few years ago. Give me your take on this. What is he trying to accomplish? And is he going to be able to accomplish?
Well, the tariffs are an interesting game that he's playing there. I mean, obviously, this is art of the deal. It's, he proposes the most outrageous thing ever, and then they sit down and negotiate what they're actually going to do. A lot of what Trump is doing with tariffs is not good, but I do actually see a strand of hope, which is that Donald Trump seems to be going out of his way to inflame not China and Russia, but the NATO countries, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, countries like that. And that is very interesting. Meanwhile, he's very willing to negotiate and sit down with Russia. And it seems like even some of the statements he's made about China with the tariffs, I saw one statement he made where he said, well, I would be willing to drop this tariff on China if they opened some car manufacturing plants in the United States. Did you hear him say that? Now, that's interesting. China opening car manufacturing plants in America would be great, right? That would be awesome. China is the world's biggest producer of new energy vehicles or electric cars, the world's largest car market. Imagine if cars that Chinese people, as they're rising up from poverty and, getting cars for the first time in their family's history, imagine some of those cars were manufactured in Minnesota or Wyoming or Idaho, or that would be great for America. So, and I heard that, and it's almost like, he's playing a tough game. Like, I'm going to make China do this, but it's almost like he wants the USA to get more involved with China's economy just on his terms, right? He wants to kind of dictate to some degree how they do it. And he's using the threat of tariffs to make that happen. So I really like the idea of the USA getting less involved with the NATO countries and with the European, Western European collective West economy. And I also really like the idea of the USA becoming more integrated into the rising new economy in the BRICS countries. And every so often, Trump, with his actions, drops a hint that he also agrees with that. And that gives me a reason to be hopeful. So there you go. Yeah.
See, I got the sense that with the tariffs, he was trying to bring jobs back to America. That the tariffs were this kind of threat of, hey, if you open up factories here, these tariffs won't necessarily come into play. Or, we want to bring those jobs back into the United States. And tariffs is the threat that we're using effectively to compel either China or some of the other countries to open those plants in America, especially since many of those places are American companies anyway. Like many of the companies that are in China that are shipping those things back into America are American companies. And
well, tariffs, when it really gets down to it, you're just taking care of American businesses, right? You're giving them an advantage. That's really all that you're doing. And they say, well, it creates jobs, or it creates American jobs. To some degree or other, it might do that. But the biggest jobs killer is not, free trade. It's not offshoring. The biggest jobs killer is technology. Right. The biggest jobs killer is artificial intelligence and the technological leaps that are going on right now. Even if we were still manufacturing the same amount of steel in the United States that we were in the 1950s, we would employ about 1% of the number of workers that are involved in the process of making that steel, because the process has been automated. I mean, technology has greatly advanced. In Cleveland, they have the steel yards down by the river. They've turned them into a giant Walmart and Sam's Club and all that. They call it Steel Yards Common. I used to point to that as an example of the transition to the low-wage economy. The steel yards, where people used to work in industry, has been replaced by these retail jobs that are much lower paying, no union representation, et cetera. And they have this giant, place where you can go and shop at a giant Walmart, Steel Yards Common in Cleveland. That is the issue. The issue is not simply that, we're on a global market and all that. And that the protectionist rhetoric kind of misses that, right? This is the built-in problem of, technology replacing human labor power. Self-driving cars should be a great thing, but in our system, self-driving cars lead to riots in the streets and mass unemployment. And why should a great technological leap like self-driving cars cause a problem? These are problems of the irrational market system. These are not problems of we just are too globally inclined. We need more tariffs and protections.
Mhm. No, I agree with you. I just don't know a way out. Because you're right. I look, I'm one of those people who think technology should be the thing that liberates, that frees us in some respects. Because the issue is always who does the labor.
Yeah.
Like, it's like we're stuck with this kind of survival thing. And the catch becomes, okay, who is going to actually do the work? And if you have a machine to do it, okay, well, that solves an issue. The problem is that machine is typically owned by 1%, and the objective of the 1% is to make more and more cash. And we don't seem to have a government policy-wise, or even a mentality that can kind of deal with that issue. Like, for example, what happens, like most counters, when you go into stores now, automated checkout counters. Okay, so you don't need 3 people working at the counter now. You only need really 1. And if you're talking about a big grocery store, okay, you might have in the old days had 20 people working at that store. Okay, well, now you might only need 3. And then you go into self-driving cars. Okay, well, now you don't need all of these taxi drivers. So you have 100,000 people who effectively lose their jobs. Same thing with truckers. And you can go through various sections of the economy and bleed off jobs. And then the catch becomes, okay, well, if these people don't have jobs, how are they going to buy food? And do you even have a society that can accommodate the fact that hundreds of thousands of people are now not needed in the workforce? Give it 20 years. It may not necessarily be now, but in 20 years or so, yeah, automated cars are going to be a thing. Trucks that can drive all across the country by themselves are going to be a thing. Drones delivering stuff is going to be a thing. But that also means that those people no longer have jobs. And the catch becomes, how does your society accommodate all of these people no longer working because the economy doesn't need these people to work? There's no answer for that in the way that we think about work. From our point of view, if you're not working, you're lazy and you deserve to starve on the street because you're not working. That may not be true in the future. Give me your take on that. Like, do you see a way out to that? Do you see us reconciling that in any particular way going forward? Because
I have raised the slogan over and over again. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And ultimately, these problems of technology replacing human labor and the frequent glut on the market and what's called the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and this is all built into the irrational market system. And ultimately, we need the state to rationally plan and control the economy to make sure we continue having growth and we don't have these irrational problems of abundance creating poverty and technological advancement creating poverty. We have a 4-point plan on our website. Mobilize to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States, hire millions of people to pave the roads and rebuild the power grid and new schools, new universities, new water treatment facilities, high-speed railway, rebuild America. That's step 1. Step 2 is public ownership of our natural resources. The natural wealth of America should go into the public budget, right? So much wealth comes from America's soil, America's oil and natural gas and coal and timber, et cetera. But we don't get any of it. It just goes into the pockets of Wall Street corporations. Well, if the natural wealth was going into the public budget, we could take the burden of taxation off the population, and we would be getting rich off of America's natural wealth. Step 3 would be public control of our and the creation of a national bank. A bank that would inject credit into communities strategically as part of an overall plan to ensure growth. Right now, the way banks lend money is based on what they think will get them, profits, basically. And there are rules about discrimination, et cetera. But overall, to get a loan from a bank the bank is thinking, am I going to make a profit from this? Well, if we had a national bank that was strategically saying, all right, we need to stimulate this sector. We need people to buy homes in this area. We need this kind of business to open. And they were assigning credit based on an overall national plan, we could rejuvenate the economy. And so the creation of a national bank. And then from there, an economic bill of rights. Roosevelt proposed an economic bill of rights, but I'm thinking of economic bill of rights in a different way than Bernie Sanders talks about it, and the way that the left generally talks about it. When we talk about the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, people talk about that as a handout. They say, hey, look, we give handouts to big corporations all the time. Why don't we give a handout to the people, give them some free education, give them healthcare? I don't see it that way. I see it as an investment, right? If we're going to have a strong economy, the source of all wealth is human labor, is human beings. And so if we're going to have a strong, productive economy, we need healthy people that can go out and, innovate and work hard with healthy bodies. We're going to need an educated workforce. We're going to need a lot of engineers, a lot of scientists, a lot of people that understand high-level mathematics and quantum mechanics and things like that. So we're going to need to educate our population. And we're going to need the labor power of every person to be employed. So a jobs guarantee means that, if the private sector can't hire you, we hire you to pave the bridges or rebuild the railways or clean up the community or provide some service. We hire you and utilize your labor power as a person. I view the Economic Bill of Rights, the fourth plank of our economic program, as an investment in the population. Because human beings are the source of all wealth. So we need to invest in human beings. We don't have physical economy in the United States. We have an economy based on derivative ripoff schemes. We have an economy based on big corporations that are invested all over the globe and maximizing their profits by holding back development and keeping countries in poverty. And we need to rebuild America's economy to be based on economic growth. And the slogan that we've rallied around is we need a government of action to fight for working families. I don't know if you saw, Trump said in his speech, he said that his priority was, quote, immediate relief for working families. Now, I thought that was an interesting choice of words. I'm not saying that's necessarily because of what CPI is doing, but I did, the reason we're using the phrase working families, we didn't invent that, was because during the 1990s, the labor unions in the United States started talking about working families. That became a phrase that they used because they did polling. And polling showed that in America, the word working class doesn't really go over. People don't really like that. They think, everyone in America thinks they're middle class. They don't think they're working class. And yeah, it's weird. It's a weird psychology. And that working class, you hear working class, you think of, Marxism, you think of, for whatever reason, Americans don't like the word working class. But in the 90s, the SEIU union and the AFL-CIO realized that if you talk about working families, people like that. That's a phrase they like. And so they started using it. And then in the 2000s, they all stopped using it because the memo got sent out that the phrase working families, I kid you not, is somehow anti-LGBT. Now, I don't know how that works because gay people have families as far as I'm concerned. And gay people have fought for the right to adopt, the right to, but yeah, now the woke left says you're not allowed to say working families because it's anti-LGBT. So when we formed the Center for Political Innovation, we're like, we're not playing ball with this woke left stuff. And so we came up with a slogan for what we're for. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Now, the government of action is we're getting past this neoliberal notion that the government needs to stay out. No, we want a government that is mobilizing to, provide relief, but also to build and construct. So a government of action to fight for working families. And that's a very carefully thought out slogan that we came up with. And we used the phrase working families, which when people hear about working families, they like it. That's probably why Donald Trump said it in his speech. And that was a brilliant maneuver because he was saying to the Democrats, I'm for what you used to be for. You used to be for working families. And now you're for opposing me and you're for whatever, defending the liberal order from me. And so I thought it was kind of neat that Donald Trump said that about working families, and he used that in his speech. So, it's interesting. And I hope that to some degree or other, we've helped popularize the phrase as well. So, yeah, we're in interesting times politically. I think that Trump's victory was good and it can lead to more peace. But I have my big concerns about his economic moves and what they could lead to. So, we're just gonna have to see. But at the end of the day, we just have to build a movement. That's really what it gets down to. We have to promote anti-imperialism and pro-growth, values. We have to build a real anti-imperialist movement, and there's no shortcuts. There's no way, there's no substitute for that, right? The reason that Roosevelt was able to pass all the great reforms he did is because there was a big movement, right? The reason that the civil rights movement was able to accomplish everything that it did, and we had all the changes that we had in the 60s, that was because there was a big movement, and that there's really no substitute for going out and building a real movement right now. And that within the power structure, there are big disagreements about the global system and about how to manage the economy. And we should utilize those disagreements to build the biggest movement that we can build.
Caleb, last question or last take that I want to get you on.
Sure.
There has been a change of language coming out of Washington. And one of those changes has to do in relation to the war in Ukraine. Rubio came out and said this, which again, is rather shocking because up to, for the longest time, this is Russian propaganda. If you acknowledge reality for what reality is, this is Rubio acknowledging reality for what it is.
It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict. And frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies, Capitol Hill, and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy. It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated.
Rubio is acknowledging this is a proxy war. He's acknowledging this is a proxy war. And this is something that people like me, people like you, people like who followed this issue has pointed out. If we are giving them all of the weapons in the world, all of the money in the world, all of the intelligence in the world, if we are giving them the means to fire missiles into Russia, then by definition, it is a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. Rubio just acknowledged it.
Yeah. Well, it's great what Rubio is saying. Again, we're hearing a lot of great stuff from the Trump administration regarding Russia.
Yeah.
But I'm still waiting for it to happen, right? It's got to happen. It ain't over till it's over. I want to see a peace deal. I want to see a ceasefire. I want to see an agreement about where the border is, a line drawn. And that's what I want to see. And, I'm optimistic. I'm smiling. I hear rumors that this might happen, that might happen. But until it happens, we got to wait because I fear that if it doesn't happen, if somehow this goes wrong, it'll be very hard to get back to this place. They'll say, look, we tried, look what we did, and so we got to make sure that this goes all the way through. That's my position.
Do you get the sense that Trump would just drop it? Like if he's pushing Ukraine, he's pushing Europe, he's pushing all of these groups. And somewhere along the way, it's like, okay, these guys are not on board. These guys are not allowing it. Where he said, okay, fair enough. I'll let it fail. I let Zelensky fail. I let the Ukrainian military fail. I let them figure it out on their own. Meaning either they accept the deal or Trump just lets it fall apart. That's the sense I get. That all things being equal, he would just let it fall apart. He's like, fair enough. You don't want to come to the bargaining table. You need to lose in order to come to some kind of agreement. Meaning he's going to get the agreement. Either he's going to get the agreement with the Ukrainian military still standing or with them laying on their backs.
Well, I think if Donald Trump was afraid of being accused of being too friendly to Putin or pandering too hard to Russia, he wouldn't be doing the things he's doing right now.
Agreed.
And I don't think that Donald Trump is faking out Russia because he's really gone all in on this. This isn't just a mild statement. These are really serious moves that are happening. So I hope that they can be successfully finished off. Donald Trump's efforts to make peace with North Korea were intentionally sabotaged from within by Mike Pompeo and by John Bolton. And Mike Pompeo and John Bolton are out, and they will have no role in this administration. And now Donald Trump is surrounded by people who didn't betray him. He kept track of who betrayed him after he left office and who didn't.
Right.
So my hope is that, people like Pete Hegseth, people like Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is not talking like the Marco Rubio we all know, and that makes me think he's lost his free will.
That's what one of the people said. It was like, is Marco Rubio lost his mind? Like, this is so different, right?
Yeah, it sounds to me like he's been told basically, you do what Trump says or you're out. You're out, buddy. Yeah. And it looks to me like Trump really does want to make this deal with Russia. He wants to be remembered as the guy who ended the Ukraine war. And he's saying, look, I don't care what you believe. I don't care who you talk to. This is what we're doing. And I hope he's successful, and I hope they're not able to stop him from doing it. And, the British and the French, and they're all doing everything they can to stop him, but they don't really have the power. The main thrust behind the war is the United States, right? And that's what everybody knows. And so if the United States wants this to end, the United States can end it, right? And Germany and France can throw a fit, and they can be angry about it. But it is the U.S. maneuvering in Ukraine that brought this whole thing about. And so the USA can end it, and I hope they do.
Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a writer, political analyst, teacher. Oh, I'm sorry, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. Caleb, where can people find you just so they can look you up?
Well, my organization is the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. So there you go.
Badass. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate this, Caleb. Thank you.
Thank you.
love it, whatever comes out of your mouth. I'm
Thanks.
always
Yeah.
fascinated.
Well, it's always a pleasure to come on. I enjoy these sessions. So thank you.
Thanks, man. All right. I am going to end this a bit early today because I have to move. I need to